Trying to reach my goals, got no time for mistakes. Yeah, I'm standing on business, need a big safe. Suited up, got the blueprint in the briefcase. It's go time on the grind, these are big stakes.
Broadcasting from the franchise Sidekick studio, welcome to the Sidekick Life. Get ready for stories of passion, problem solvings, and success from those living life on their terms. Tyler, podcast number 1. Lots of effort, lots of prep has gone into this. And it's funny because, we've been, and we've been thinking a little bit about how do we want to open this, right? A lot of podcasts have an opening and we're thinking about how do we really relay the message? And we've had a little bit of a dialogue, a little bit of a debate on the way to go about it. So we decided to go informal, and I want to read what I think a potential podcast opening can sound like. And then we're going to just kind of do what we just did, right? Talk a little bit about, all right. So welcome to the Sidekick Life, a podcast focused on self-interest, the kind of self-interest that motivates people to solve big problems for others, and in return creates the opportunity to live life on your terms. Here you will learn how self-interest can be the greatest tool for helping others.
Yeah. So self-interest,
yeah,
scary word, right?
Right.
But it's true. Entrepreneurs, they solve problems, they create value, and they do it for a reason, right? Like they want to help people, but there's something inside that makes them do it. What is that?
Well, it's self-interest, and I think people want to shy away from the topic all the time. And this is why we struggled a little bit with should we really say self-interest? Because are people going to think that we mean selfishness, or are people going to think that that's just another entrepreneur who only cares about making money? But what I really think it means to me is that entrepreneurs solve other people's problems. It's the only way you're successful. You have to create value for other people to be successful. And the reason that people become entrepreneurs is because they want to live a better life for themselves, for their family, for whatever it is that they want to do, whatever living life on their terms means, right? Yep. But all the time we shy away from this idea of I'm an entrepreneur for my own self-interest, because we all think people are going to say, oh, what a jerk. You shouldn't say that. Yeah. Only talk about what you do for others. And I mean, we're Franchise Sidekick. We are all about helping others and protecting others. But for some reason, we shy away from the thing that it needs to be the greatest motivator to overcome the hard stuff. Because you and I have started several businesses, and we know it requires grit, and it requires perseverance, and it requires capital, and it requires scary things that you have to push into. And the reason you do that is because you want to create a business to help others to then ultimately live life on your terms, which is self-interest. Yeah. So anyway, I guess talk a little bit more. What's scary about that?
Well, you're going to be judged. You're scared. You don't want to be selfish, because we're not selfish people. All we do is give value. We give value so much all the time to our families, to our clients, to our team. All the time we give value. So we don't want to be looked at as self-interested or selfish people, because we're not selfish. So we're scared to say it. But it's true.
Too many people are scared to say it.
Deep down inside, it's why we do what we do, man.
It's why people have jobs, because of their own self-interest with their bills and their life. It's why people start businesses. It's why people go to school. It's why people do everything, is because at the end of the day, you want to live the best possible life, but people don't want to say it. And the reason that I wanted to say it is because I don't want this to feel like just another podcast that's about, let's hear all the great things about the business, because there's a whole bunch of business podcasts. I listen to a ton of them. They're great, but I wanted this to be the connection of tell us about your business, which solve problems for others, and what it has done for your life, how you're now living life on your terms. So when we're getting into this with guests, we're going to be talking about, cool, tell us about your business. That's going to be a big part of this show, because we want to learn all about these great businesses. But let's go a little bit farther. Tell us about how you spend your free time. Tell us about that cool thing that you bought that you don't want to tell people about. Because I got a couple of those things. I don't like sharing it with people because I'm like, are they going to judge me? But that's what we want to get into. We want to hear about those types of things in people's lives.
Yeah, it's okay. Normalize it. It's fine to be like that. We need that we are driven off that. We need that, and it's okay. Everybody does it. It's fine. So we give a ton of value to people. So let's talk about some of the things we get back in return. But in reality, we give a ton of value, and we got to be okay with it.
And last thing I'll say about this, and then we can move on. For the people listening to this, I want them to not only think about how can they become entrepreneurs to solve problems, but I want them to be aspirational in what they want in their own lives. Too often people are short-sighted. It's like, I'm solely focused on this business. And then when things get hard, you don't have the vision or the mission defined as to why I'm going to spend 20 hours today working, or why I'm going to sleep on the couch at the office, or why I'm going to spend the majority of my life savings on this idea. It is all because of some purpose that you want to create for your own life, and it should be well defined. So let's go hear from other people that have already done it.
And I want people to be encouraged by the fact, solve problems. Understand that as a human being, the more problems you solve, the wealthier, the likely chance of you being successful is going to go way up. I want to encourage just everybody, because I think it's an epidemic right now in America that people don't solve problems.
Yeah.
They don't look for solutions. They don't add value. It's what I can get back in return a lot. And it drives me absolutely crazy. And I think about it with my kids. How do I teach my kids to solve problems all the time? Because it is an epidemic right now.
And not only the number of problems you solve, but the size of the problem you solve and who you solve it for.
How many people you solve it for.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's a value equation. The problem you solve times how many people you solve it for, that's going to be a wealth equation for you.
Yep. And we're going to talk about it here in a minute, but you and I have done it several times is we've identified problems. And I think the really good entrepreneurs are the ones that once they see that problem, they sort of obsess over it. Like, how am I going to solve it? And again, all with the idea of once I solve it, here's how it's going to create purpose in my own life as well as the people that I serve.
Yeah,
so
100%.
Anyway, cool. All right. Well, let's transit. So we got that out of the way, right? We'll decide, I guess.
We still don't know how we're going to do the beginning, but it's fine. It's all good. It's all good.
We'll figure out next week. So let's talk a little bit about how we got here. Nobody here really knows who you and I are. So let's start with you. Tell me, or our audience, tell us how you got here, what you've done in your career, and what you're doing in Franchise Sidekick.
Man, it's a trip. It's a long time. We talked about this yesterday, so I had to think about like how I got here. How did I get here? Going back, and I'm going to start way back. I'm going to start growing up on a farm in Iowa. I'm 12 years old. And growing up on a farm is hard, man. Like, it's tough. Like, you have to be an entrepreneur for sure. You have to manage production, finances, all that stuff, sales all the time. And it's tough. Economically, it's tough. So my dad, when I was probably 12 years old, he started going to farm auctions and he would actually buy old cars. And so he'd bring these cars back, he'd fix them up, flip them essentially, and make, $1,000 or whatever, right? So I was obsessed. I love this. Like, this was like my first taste of entrepreneurship outside of being a farmer, right? So I started helping him. So at 12 years old, I was in the garage every night. I was in the shop every night, helping him sand down cars, paint, fix stuff. And this is my first adding value thing, because I started to think about this. And like, I was adding value to my dad and my family, but I didn't really realize it at the time. But eventually, I did this for free. I didn't get paid for it, right? Yeah. So eventually my mom's like, hey, you should pay our son for, busting his butt every night after school doing this stuff. So he decided to give me a crappy car, right? So it was a 1983 Buick Regal T-Type. I remember the car. I remember to this day, right?
I'm going to look this up.
You gotta look it up. We'll get it. Tim, you got to get this in the video, right? So I sanded this thing down. I painted, I fixed it, whatever. It took probably 6 months, right? Sold this car. I made like $2,000. This is like 1995 money, man. I'm rolling in it. I'm 12 years old, 13 maybe. So I took that money and immediately bought a four-wheeler. So horrible decision, right?
Yep.
Reinvest. I bought a four-wheeler, right? So I bought this four-wheeler. Awesome. And then I'm like, damn, I got no more money, right? So I essentially had to claw my way back. I think I saved up $1,500, went and bought another car, fixed it up, sold it. I'm like, this time I'm going to keep flipping cars, right? I'm going to keep doing this, right? So adding value, the other side of it, adding value now to my buddies who are all getting the age of driving, 15, 16 years old, and started selling them cars. By the time I was 22 years old, I'd sold a couple hundred cars, making a couple thousand on each. At that point, I bought, I paid for my college. I bought my first restaurant. So I started opening restaurants. So like, it was my first love. I loved it, but I was always adding value that whole time. Right. It taught me so much. That was probably one of those defining moments of my life, that stretch. It was so much fun too. It was awesome. Right. So I owned these restaurants for a while, they did great. I sold those and then I got into franchising with you. Right. So Complete Nutrition, I bought a franchise. So I had 3 locations, but the thing you told me, this still sticks with me, is how much value I added to the franchise community.
You did, absolutely.
Right? Never ask for anything in return, always trying to solve problems. And like, that was super rewarded because you're the guy who called me and said, hey, let's start a company together, 5, 6, 7 years later. And that's a big
reason as to why I did.
So it was the adding value, solving problems. And so I had those 3 stores, I sold those, did it great. And then we started essentially Franchise Sidekick shortly after. I did some other stuff in between there. But that's how I got here to this point. But it was all adding value, solving problems from age of 12 on up to currently now.
Amazing, man. And by the way, a couple things. One, you're way too humble because you did a lot of other stuff, but I know you don't want to say everything. You did a lot of online marketing, a lot of entrepreneurship. And also what you said about being a franchisee at Complete Nutrition and why I called you, that is probably number one. Not probably, absolutely number one, because there's a lot of people in a franchise system that say the franchisor is responsible for solving the problem.
Yep.
And the thing that I super appreciated about you was you were always the guy that said, I'm going to solve the problem. I'm not going to come with issues or challenges all the time. I'm going to solve the problem. Always a super positive attitude. Oftentimes a trailblazer in the things that we did, because you just went out there and started to try things out that you knew would work for a system.
Yep.
And when you did it, you weren't shy about sharing it. Like a lot of times also, you'll get maybe a franchisee that says, hey, look, I created this on my dime. I want some value back for it. And you were the type of guy that just said, give it away, give it to everybody else, make everybody else more successful, because it's going to ultimately rise the tide for everybody. And it stuck with me so much that, like you said, later in life, when I had an opportunity to think about who do I want to, kind of do business with, you were one of the top guys that jumped into my mind. Now, it took me several phone calls till I could years until I could finally convince you to do it, because you're doing other things, but it's just, you never know how it's going to come around.
I appreciate it, man. And honestly, it goes back to solving problems, being the guy that adds value all the time. And so a lot of times people are like, oh, it's so lucky because you have a great network of people or whatever. Like, it's because I'm always adding value. I'm not asking for things in return. My biggest thing is entitlement, right? Like, I hate when I feel like people are being entitled. So I have this thing with me when I feel like somebody's being entitled, I just boom, check it off. Like they're dead to me at that point.
Yep.
Like honestly, it's hard to recover if I feel like you're an entitled person, because I don't believe in it. So it's just always adding value, getting better, solving problems for people, and it'll come back to you 100 times.
Yep, absolutely. That and bad Zoom backgrounds. I remember we had some Zoom calls with people with bad Zoom backgrounds. You're like, no way, we're not working.
We're out. So flip it over, dude. You have been uber successful. You're sitting here, what are you, 44? 44 years old. You've sold multiple companies, multiple exits. Dude, you're in a great position right now. So take us back to how this thing started, because you have a similar path almost. Yeah,
mine might take a few more minutes, but I promise it won't take too many. So yeah, actually the big difference between you and I is you and your dad being entrepreneurs from the early days. That was not in my vocabulary. Like my parents were fantastic, but very hardworking, always working for other people. Dad worked 2 jobs, oftentimes didn't really see him much because he was just working so much trying to provide. Right. And so I went to school for journalism, thought I was going to be on the radio doing sports, probably in some small town somewhere, but met my wife, my senior year of college, decided to stick around Omaha, and my best friend was working at a GNC store. So he said, hey, come work with me for a period of time. And I just kind of fell in love with it. I fell in love with nutrition. I fell in love with the idea, and I got really lucky because the franchisee that owned that was super entrepreneurial and became a bit of a mentor of mine. I had some early success in the stores. He asked me to become more of a operational leader, eventually a COO. And we would go around the Midwest looking at underperforming franchise stores, GNC franchise stores. We would buy them. We would apply this model that he created, and we would immediately see success. I mean, at one point he had 15 GNC stores. I was running all of them from an operational standpoint for him. And 5 of those were the top 5 in the country, right? I mean, between these 15 stores, we were doing about 22 million in sales. A couple of them were doing 2 million each. Yeah. And they were the top 5 in the country. And it was because of this model that he created, and ultimately this product line that he had created, because we didn't want to compete with, online or grocery or anything else. So this turns into a company called NDS Nutrition. And NDS Nutrition is this supplement company providing products to GNC franchisees. And I'm traveling the country. I'm going into all these franchisee stores all over the country, and I'm training them on this method we used in our own stores to elevate sales. And it was one of the coolest experiences of my life, and something that I didn't even realize how much impact it was having on other people. I was just young and traveling the country, but we were traveling in doing this and did it for a number of years. And then I kind of had what I call my burn in the boats moment. So imagine being on the road a lot for a couple of years, going into these stores every single time you're there. It's transformational for them. They're having the best days. They're adding these products. They're changing their business model. And one day I'm in Houston, and I spent all day in this store. And at the end of the day, the owner never came in, never said hi, never called me, never nothing. At the end of the day, he calls the manager. The manager says, had the best day we've ever had. And the owner was like, great. All right. Do whatever he says to do. Click. Goodbye. He was golfing that day. Right. And I'm just frustrated because I'm like, I took my time to come down here to train his staff, to do all these things. And at the end of the day, he didn't even want to say hello. He didn't want to say thank you. And I was at dinner that night with a colleague, and I'm just like, man, I can do this. This guy has 6 stores. No, 8. I think he had 8 stores. And one day I can come down here and have his very best day ever. And so why couldn't I multiply that across other stores? I knew I had what I needed to be successful, at least from the sales side. So that was my burn in the boats moment, where I said, you know what, even though I love this job and I love my mentor and I love everything else, I'm going to become a business owner and become a franchisee. So I think I'm 24, 25 at the time. and I applied to become a franchisee with GNC. I still got the letter. They rejected me.
You know, the letter. I've seen it.
Yeah, that's right. And it's okay. They should have rejected me. I probably wasn't in a position financially that they wanted me to be in. And that's important as a franchisor. So, but I was still super motivated to become a business owner. So I applied with Anytime Fitness that was growing. They approved me to open multiple locations. So I went to my boss, my mentor, my guy that had kind of taught me entrepreneurship. And I just said, I love this job. I love the people, but I got to go. I got to go follow this dream, right? And so I went and opened an Anytime Fitness in a small Fremont, Nebraska, small town. They were building the building that I was going to go in. So I rented this construction trailer. This is my ultimate all-time favorite entrepreneurship story of everything that I've done.
So we've got images to prove it. We got pictures. So we're going to post those too, because those are fantastic, man.
Great.
It's awesome.
25-year-old me.
Exactly the same.
So I'm in this construction trailer in the middle of winter. All the windows won't close. The door doesn't really close. I got to run an extension cord out to the generator the contractor's using to build the place out, to run a space heater. But I'm running my pre-sale out of here. And it was my ultimate. I couldn't wait to get there in the morning. I didn't want to leave at night because I was now finally doing something for myself, making money for myself. And it was just an adrenaline rush, even though it was really cold. And it's funny how life works out because, I don't know, 60 days later or so, I get a call back from the franchisee of GNC, the founder of NDS Nutrition. And he said, hey, for whatever reason, things are not the same here without you. I want you to come back. And I was like, I can't. I'm like, I'm on to this new journey. I want to be a business owner. And then this is a sentence that changed my life forever. He said, well, that's how I want you to come back and be my partner. And I just said, now we're talking, right? Yep. And so I went back and I became the minority operating partner of NDS Nutrition, which was a multi-million-dollar business, right? And we just continued to focus on it and grow it. It also forced me into semi-absentee ownership really quickly of my franchise because I couldn't put time into it anymore. So I had to call somebody that I knew that I had previously worked with, worked out a deal for them to come be a partner and run the Anytime Fitness. So while I'm working out how to be an operational partner of NDS, I'm also finding my own operational partner for the Anytime Fitness gyms. And what a great moment for me to figure out both. So we go on for a number of years, operate NDS. He sells the GNCs and we eventually start our own concept called Complete Nutrition.
You skipped over a couple of things there. Like, let's go back on a couple of these things. So the couple of things, like the guy you added value for at those stores, it's funny how entrepreneurs work. Like you added that value and there was no reciprocation from it, right? And so you're like, peace out. So your partner, you added value, so much value to him, he reached out, after 60 days. Yep. Like there's something to be said there, right? Like that is a huge part of the story. The fact that you added so much value, he reached out to you again and changed the course of your life.
Absolutely. And why? Because I was interested in self-interest, right? I mean, I needed to know that I was on a path that was going to be better for me based on the things that I was learning and seeing. And, so it's very important when you've got talented people in your life or whatever that are providing value. How do you make sure that it's worth it for them as well?
Yeah.
Pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered and don't be a hog.
And one part of the story I missed too, like I was actually working one of those GNC stores, you know what I'm saying? So like, I just skipped over a little bit, but go back to that. And I was in those stores, flipping those stores, we started almost the same way. It's pretty incredible.
Totally. I think, I just happened to be closer to the owner.
Yeah.
I lived here and you lived in Iowa.
Probably, right?
So anyway, and the GNCs, they were super successful. He sold them. But the model we were doing was a little different. So again, solving problems. GNC, 4,000 stores across the country. I like to call them a little bit of a kind of a glorified grocery store. And what I meant by that was the average ticket transaction was $25 to $35. Most people would come in, buy their multivitamin, buy their one other thing, get it off the shelf, throw it in the basket and walk out. And we realized there wasn't any retail store. And again, this was back, 20 years ago. Yeah. This was before Amazon was super prevalent in this space or Food, Drug, and Mass was super prevalent in this space. So there was nobody that was really taking the time to walk a client through an entire program based on whatever their goal was. Did they have achy joints? Did they want to lose weight? Did they want to gain muscle? Did they have bad hair, skin, and nails? Whatever it was, we had the ability to kind of walk them through a program that would work, and nobody else was doing that. And that's why our average transaction was between $80 and $100. Very different business model. So we said, different business model, let's go create a different business. Ultimately created Complete Nutrition. And man, I'll tell you what, I learned the value of a franchise at that point because all the things that were already provided to us, POS systems, brand name, products, product shelving, you name it. Everything that a franchisor offers was gone. And now you had to create it on your own. And we went from the most successful stores with retail employees that were making a ton of money to now having basically no following. People didn't know if Complete Nutrition was selling supplements, food, or treadmills. So we had to re-educate everybody. And it took us 2 years, really 2 years to kind of get a footing underneath us. But eventually we got there. And our best employees, they came to us and they said, hey, you've got this figured out now. And we've been doing this for a long time, first with GNC and now with Complete Nutrition. Why don't you let us go open some stores? And we really didn't have plans to own or operate it as a franchise, but we said this could be a good opportunity to test it. And these are the very best people to test it with, because they were within a couple hours of us. They had been working these stores for a number of years. And we're like, now or never, to see if this thing would work. So we actually had to fund much of their growth and their development, like early franchisees.
They're young franchisees too.
Yeah, they were young.
Age-wise too.
Yep,
they were young.
So we had to fund it and we had to take that risk. And the good news is they had tremendous early success. Tremendous. And so we just came off of being the fastest growing supplement company in GNC, which we were still kind of operating some of that. Now we're Complete Nutrition, and we've got some really early successful franchisees. And so the reputation, the word started to spread. And when we opened up franchising to the country, it went like wildfire. Within the first 18 months of opening it up, we awarded 240 locations. Again, young, brand new franchisor, we had to figure out how to open and operate these. In fact, we froze development. And one day we just said, you know what, we've got to make sure these things get open and they're healthy before we do any more. We could have sold another 240, but we didn't. And we just paused. And for the next 10 years, we operated this franchise. We got it to, we opened over just over 200 locations. We got it to 130 million in sales, and we operated it for 10 years. And I'll tell you, it was the most rewarding, one of the most rewarding and by far the most challenging thing, stressful thing I have ever done. Young franchisor, new kind of market, if you will, what we were doing, a lot of young franchisees, super duper stressful. Yeah. But 10 years later, we had it in a place after the ups and downs of the entire thing that there was a private equity group that was interested in buying it. And so we partnered with them, sold the majority to them. And that's when I was no longer the day-to-day leader. They wanted to bring in somebody else. And I was supportive of this, somebody that had the chops to maybe take it from where we were to the next level. Mm-hmm. And I started to lead franchise development. And during that time of leading franchise development, I got to start going to all these different franchise development shows and learning all about it. And there was this new concept, and we used it just a little bit as a franchisor, called franchise sales organizations. And I wasn't really familiar with it, but basically it's like a real estate agent that wants to sell your home for you. Imagine you're a franchisor and you want to develop all over the country, and you need somebody who knows what they're doing to go develop all markets all over the country. That's what these franchise sales organizations would do. And after a period of time of running development for Complete Nutrition, I just decided working for somebody else wasn't for me. And so I wanted to go start this franchise sales organization. And we wanted to do it on some principles that were different, which I won't get into today. But the number one most important principle was, I am a huge believer in focus on one thing until you're the best in the world. And even inside your own organization, you know this because we talk about it all the time, even your people have to be able to focus on one thing so they can become the best at it. If you do a lot of things, you're going to be average at all of them. If you do one thing, you can become the best in the world at it. And we wanted to be the best in the world at representing the next big thing franchisor. So there's a tremendous number of emerging franchisors out there. Lots of them think they have the chops to be the next big thing, but the reality is they don't. They don't have a unique differentiator. They don't have enough in their economics to be attractive. They don't have dynamic leadership, whatever it is, right? So we wanted to put a process together to truly identify the next Jimmy John's, Massage Envy, Orange Theory, whatever you want to say, and identify it early so we could then go represent them across the country. And it took some time, right? Like any business, it took some time to figure it out, get the right ones. But I'm proud to say within 3 years, we turned Franchise Fastlane into the largest franchise sales organization in the country. Today, Franchise Fastlane has over 100 employees. It'll award somewhere in the ballpark of 2,500 franchise locations a year, which makes them by far the biggest. And they're changing a heck of a lot of lives. And so that thing turned into an absolute freight train. And I knew it had some legs and it had a chance to be successful, but it turned into much, much more than I ever thought it would be.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And just to kind of recap a little bit of what you just said there, how many people have you helped in terms of buying a franchise? How many locations awarded has your companies actually awarded?
Yeah, I think it's probably somewhere right now in the ballpark of 8,000 to 9,000 and growing.
9,000 locations.
Yeah.
People, that's a huge impact. Economies, employees, the franchisees, the franchisors. It's an incredible thing you've done.
Yeah, well, thank you. And again, the reason that I did it all is because I was hoping to live a better life myself and to have purpose. And I had to go figure out a way to help a tremendous number of people in order to do that, right? So I'm very proud of Fastlane. But it's funny how life works, all these things that just sort of happen. The franchisors that were being developed by Fastlane, they were getting acquired at a rapid pace, a pace that nobody had ever seen in franchising before. I think at one period, in like a 1.5 year period, we had 6 or 7 franchisors go from the emerging stage to being acquired by very reputable private equity groups, and they're still doing great today. Yep. Right. And so I wanted to learn more about why private equity was acquiring them. So I started to talk to some people in the space to learn it. And ultimately, when people learned more, these bankers and private equity folks learned more about what we were doing at Fastlane, they started to knock on our door. Mm-hmm. And at first I had an allergic reaction. I had no interest. I thought I was going to operate Fastlane for the rest of my life, honestly, because we were helping people become entrepreneurs, which is the passion of my life. That's what I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to. We were making great money and I was not running the day-to-day. I had a co-founder and she was running the majority of the day-to-day. So I really had no pain and I was doing all the things that I liked. Mm-hmm. But, when you get the knock on the door, you at least say, well, how would this look and what would it be structured like? And, I threw the idea out of my head and then it came back and I threw it away again. And I always say, if you throw an idea out of your head twice and it continues to come back, then you should spend some time on it. It was a great opportunity financially. So we decided that we were going to sell the majority of Fastlane to a private equity group, but I had one stipulation in order to do it. I knew I was not ready to be done with franchising. Mm-hmm. I knew I wanted to help people become entrepreneurs. And like I said earlier, sometimes when you see an opportunity, you sort of obsess over it until you can solve it. And I never thought I was going to get to solve this problem because we were working on the franchisor side, but I was interested in looking at doing the client side differently. And what I mean by that is, there's thousands of franchise brokers, consultants, advisors, whatever you want to call them around the country. And pretty much all of them are 1099 employees, which means they are responsible for everything in the process, all the way from the content creation to the lead generation, to the qualification, to the working them, to the funding, to the legal, you name it. And like I said earlier, if you're doing everything, you're going to be average at all of them. Nobody in the country had ever done it as an employee-based program, right? And so you and I, this is when,
let's go back to that real quick, because you kind of started to roll there, which is fantastic. So what, a year prior to that?
Yep.
A year prior to that, I mean, you'd been bugging me for a while, right? But like probably a year and a half prior to that, we had a Zoom call. And I'm in my office and I'm working on stuff. And this is a funny story because I had just randomly turned my computer a certain way that day. And because I had a whiteboard behind me, I kept having to walk around my desk and do this whiteboard, right? So I turned my computer randomly so I could just kind of go back and forth. But that was a pivotal moment because I was building a ton of just e-commerce brands. So at that time I was doing a ton of different stuff. I think I had 3 or 4 different companies, e-commerce, but I had really taught myself marketing, online marketing, funnels, that whole thing, right? And on the whiteboard behind me was all these funnels, all this stuff. Yep. And I remember you jumped on that Zoom call, like, dude, what is behind you? And I'm like, oh, this is how I sell the products I sell. This is how we scale up. Yep. And you're like, dude, can you sell franchises that way? Like, would that be doable? And I'm like, I don't know, maybe. I go, let's try it. And so you're like, let's meet next week. And I'm like, just come back and like brainstorm this with me. So came back next week. I actually built out a whole funnel, I think, at that point. Yep. And I'm like, let's try it. Let's try it. So we informally kind of talked about it and we started like, this is maybe what it looks like. This is a very early concept, right? And so I think you'd actually like, let's hire you as 1099. Let's just do this. Yep. And so we started it and it went crazy. So I think I remember coming to you and be like, dude, I need some money to do this. Like, whatever you got need, or whatever you need, right? So like I did it primarily myself, like landing pages, websites, did the ads, did the sales, everything. So it really kind of started from there, but we started selling franchises a different way. And then it morphed in this, dude, there's a better way to do this.
Which is such a fate moment, if you will, because I had everything figured out in my mind on how to do it on the client side, from the perfect process, the how to advise them, to how to educate them and all those things, the relationships with franchise people. What I didn't really understand was how to go acquire leads of qualified people, because that's the golden goose. But there's all kinds of brokers all over the country that still can't figure it out. And it's why the majority of brokers in the country do it part-time, because they can't figure out how to fill up enough, to help enough people at a time to make it full-time, and why the heavy majority of them fail out. And it was just this fate thing because, and again, that's when I said, hey, Tyler, can you come try this on a 1099 basis? You did it. It worked. And at the same time, Fastlane is getting knocked on the door by the private equity group. And I'm thinking, the only way I would consider the Fastlane transaction is if we can go to the client side. And I needed somebody that knew what you knew, that I could trust. Mm-hmm. And honestly, not all, but the majority of the other marketing people that I worked with in my life, I just always felt like they did kind of the bare minimum to get me the leads, and then to say, well, now it's on you to close. And so there was always this disconnect on how to really help people become franchise owners. But with you coming on, so at this point, you and I are starting to talk about, like, if Fastlane is sold, then how do we take the client side and roll it out into something else? And you being part of that was a huge piece of my decision to move over to the client side and to allow the private equity group to come in and buy Fastlane.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was my stipulation to them. I just said I wanted to buy out that little program, and it was just you and one other person at Fastlane. And so I bought that out of Fastlane, and you and I co-founded this concept. And at the time, we didn't have a name because the old name was My Fastlane Track,
right.
and we couldn't call it that anymore. And so we're reading a book by Donald Miller, one of my favorite books called Building a Story Brand. And you and I were both talking about this. The idea is all of our favorite movies, all of our favorite books. The concept is every one of them has a hero who has a problem. That hero meets a guide who has a process or a solution in order to get them to a desired outcome. And Donald Miller also says in your companies, it's the same way. The company is not the hero. Your customer, your client is the hero.
Which is the problem with most companies, right? Like they vomit on you. Like, oh, look at all the things we can do for you and blah, blah, blah. Like, we're going to save the day. Like, that is the problem with most companies, right? So we flipped it. And then the whole naming convention came up, right?
Exactly.
So we're sitting here thinking of like, I mean, this went on for what, weeks, months? I don't even know. Like we'd
Long
get on
time.
calls and be like, names. So we'd go through this whole thing, but like, this is how we got here, essentially.
Exactly. And so we said, well, if Donald Miller says the people that we serve are heroes and we want to reduce the risk for those heroes, who's got the back? Who protects the risk of a hero? And then one day it was just like
Sidekick.
Sidekick.
We're going to call it Robin, but that was bad. Robin, we went through like, there's a couple like Robin. I mean, there's a bunch of bad ones.
Yeah.
Doc Brown.
I love Doc Brown. Anyway, so franchise Sidekick is born, and I guess the rest is history. And so today it's 2.5 years later.
Yep.
Today we're 30 plus people. We are the fastest growing franchise advisory company in the country. This year we'll help our clients buy around 800 franchise locations. And I am convinced of this because I've seen all angles of franchising. I've been a franchisee 25 times. I've been a franchisor. I've been on the franchise sales side for the franchisor, and now I'm on the franchise sales side for the client. And I am convinced this is the absolute best way for somebody to reduce their risk when buying a franchise because we are a single organization with more resources than an individual 1099 doing it. And when we can do it that way, we can invest into better research. We can invest into better technology, into better marketing, into better training and support. And I mean, just some things like post-purchase things that we're kicking around right now too, that nobody else in the country can do because of the way we're set up.
Yeah, the model we have is unbelievable. And honestly, our goal is to reduce our clients' risk. And as you think about your time being an entrepreneur, like all those different endeavors, you've mentioned this a few times, it was profit generated, right? And now you're to the point now, like how can we change so many lives while reducing risk? And it's more purpose driven for you. So talk about that a little bit, because that's a big deal, honestly. Because if you think about everything you've told in that story, it was like opportunity, profit. Now we're in a position we can seriously change lives.
Absolutely. My career has been in what I call the 3 Ps. Early in my career, it was about profit. The second phase of my career is I wanted to prove that I could be the visionary leader. And then Sidekick is about purpose. And here's what I mean. You kicked it off, and I've been very lucky and fortunate and worked hard to have 3 different private equity exits. Corey and I partnered on NDS. We exited that one. Franchise Complete Nutrition exited that one. And then Franchise Fastlane exited that one. And so the Fastlane was the biggest by far. And so it put me in a position to say, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? I've got 4 boys at the time. My oldest was 12. My youngest was 6. And me and my wife were just thinking, like, what do we want the rest of our lives to look like? And I've got 4 core principles in my life that I want to live by. Number 1 is I want to be a great husband to my wife, Mandy. Number 2 is I want to be an example as a father. Number 3, I want to make a mark. And number 4, I want to be dangerous for good. So we pulled those 4 things up, and I said, we could go live a life of leisure. I could go golf every day. We could travel when the kids are out of school. We could do that, and it would be fine. I go, but would we really be on fire for life? Would we be purpose driven? Would I be an example to the boys? Probably not as good as I could be, right? Would I be making a mark? Would I be dangerous for good? A lot of those were not going to get checked off if we went and lived a life of leisure. And so again, one of the reasons I wanted to buy out that little part of Fastlane and to move over to the Sidekick side is I really wanted to focus on something that I didn't have to worry about profits. I didn't have to worry about proving myself anymore. I was very confident in my ability. I wanted to focus on pure purpose. How to go help people reduce their risk when buying a franchise. And I wanted to think about it in a legacy way. I wanted to think about it in what do I want people to say at the end of my life about this thing? And I still say it today. It's our mission here. We want to help more people buy a franchise than anybody in history. And that's what the core purpose of my life is as well. When I die and my kids stand up on stage and they give my eulogy, I want them to be able to say, my dad helped more people buy a franchise than anybody in history. And I think that's a life worth living. I think that's a purpose-driven life. I think that's something that you could feel really proud of and that will leave a legacy for a heck of thousands and thousands of people will have better lives, I believe, when they become business owners as opposed to the corporate America route.
It's incredible. And you're blessed to do it, but you worked your butt off for it, right? And you solved a lot a lot of problems. So
yeah, you're right. It's a blessing. It's something that I wish I could say got tremendously easier, but it hasn't. It's a business, right? A business requires solving problems and people and investment and everything else. And so the thing that I feel great about with our team here is, especially on the leadership side, is we still have a desire to work hard and to work a lot. And we do, because we're in that early kind of gritty grinding stage still, where we are trying to become the best in the world at something. But anyway, so that's enough about me. Great story for you. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to share mine. But let's talk a little bit about now, why are we doing a podcast, right? Even the name and everything else. So I guess, why don't you talk about that a little bit? Like the name, why did we call it the Sidekick Life?
I just want to talk about entrepreneurship, because I think sometimes we know entrepreneurs, they solve problems. We said 1,000 times, right? They are going to solve the world's biggest problem. It's not going to be through government or the next politician you hire. I don't care who you elect or whatever. It's not going to come from them. It's going to come from entrepreneurs, right? And I feel like sometimes they get the bad rap. Like entrepreneurs get a bad rap sometimes. And I just want to bring to light all of the things that entrepreneurs have solved ultimately. And so we want to highlight that a little bit, right? We want to bring people on this podcast who have changed a ton of lives by solving problems, giving value over and over again, and show the impact they're having on the world, because I truly believe that. So that's what we're going to do on this podcast, and not in a way like typical podcasts, or not in a way of a business podcast where it's like, tell us your story and blah, blah, blah. That's all great stuff. We want to know that, but we want to show and highlight what they get out of it, right? Because we want other people to be motivated, inspired to go do the same thing, go solve problems and live that life that they want to live on their own terms. So that's important to us. We've got some unbelievable guests. Like these guests we've lined up are going to be great.
I know. I'm super excited about that. But and for those of you that are listening, you saw on the cover, it says the Sidekick Life, which is all about what you just said. How do you be a sidekick to people, to heroes? People are heroes of their own life. How are you a sidekick to them? By solving their problems. But then the second thing that the people will see on the cover art is life on your terms. And that's where the self-interest part comes in. Like the Sidekick Life. So solving other people's problems in order to live the life that you want to live on your own terms.
Which means something different. Like to you, it means different something to me. Everybody in this room, everybody has a different life on their own terms. But we want to highlight that, because that's what everybody wants. Ultimately, they want to get to a place in their life when they don't have to choose what they want to do or be told what to do. They want to help people. They want to do things on their terms, which is so important.
Yep. I say do what you want, when you want, with who you want.
Absolutely.
And that's different for every single person. But that's what we're going to talk about, is how solving problems and cool businesses ultimately lead to these things in people's lives that they want to do, living life on their own terms. So what can people that are going to listen to this, what should they expect from the future of this podcast?
I think transparency, authentic. We're just going to come into this thing and say, hey, tell us, have a good conversation, bring some stuff out of people that you typically want to hear from them to help show authentic nature of entrepreneurs and what they're trying to do.
Yep. And I think you and I are both committed to wanting to hear the stories of others. I know our stories are going to come out. We spent a lot of time talking about it today, but we want guests who are living life on their terms through solving big problems. And we just want to ask them a lot of questions about how they're solving those problems, and then always transitioning to how it's allowing them to live life on their terms.
Yeah. And once again, everybody's on a different level. I think that's what I don't want people. I'm in a different life right now than you are, right? Sure. A different season of my life. And so I have different goals than you do, honestly. And we want to highlight that. It's okay. It's fine. You don't have to have multi-million dollar exits to be on this show. We want people in different areas of their life, different seasons of their life, to be motivated to solve problems, give value, and get to where they want to go, life on their own terms.
100%. Well, even here at Sidekick, we're helping the person, first-time entrepreneur early in their career, and we're helping the person who's considering retiring that wants to own a business with their kids. So it doesn't matter where you are. If you're interested in solving other people's problems and you're interested in living a better life, we hope this is the place for them.
Perfect.
Cool. Thanks for joining us on the Sidekick Life, where we highlight true sidekicks, entrepreneurs who've got their customers' backs, solve real-world problems, and after helping enough people, get to live the life they've always dreamed of. We'll see you next time.